The air inside the studio of legislative order was thick with an almost tangible anticipation that night. This was no ordinary talk show, and this was no ordinary taping. This was the domain of Representative Hakeem Jeffries, a polished arena where political ideas were brought to be dissected or celebrated, depending entirely on the host's will. The stage itself was a masterpiece of minimalist power. Two gray leather armchairs faced each other on an exquisite Persian rug, like twin thrones awaiting a royal confrontation. Behind them, a massive, floor-to-ceiling video wall subtly displayed the show's logo, a balanced scale of justice, tilted ever so slightly. Everything, from the sharp, focused lighting that cut through the darkness to the controlled, military silence of the camera crew, was engineered to convey a single, clear message. This is a place for serious conversations, and there will be a winner. Hakeem Jeffries, the House Minority Leader, sat in his chair like a king surveying his court. His perfectly tailored suit was without a single crease, a dark navy armor that spoke of authority and discipline. His smile, honed by 1,000 caucus meetings and campaign rallies, was a political instrument warm enough to disarm, but with a calculated edge that reminded you of the immense power behind it. He was the personification of polished, institutional power, a man who could command a room with his very presence, whose resonant, authoritative voice could turn complex policy into a clear, moral imperative. His show was an extension of that power, a platform where he could frame the national debate on his own terms, far from the chaotic floors of Congress. And then, his guest emerged, and the carefully calibrated energy of the room shifted. Ramy Youssef walked into the spotlight with a contrasting, almost hesitant quietude. He wore a simple but expensive bomber jacket over a crewneck t-shirt, an attire that whispered artistic confidence rather than shouting political ambition. He moved not with the confident, purposeful stride of a politician, but with the fluid, watchful grace of an observer. To his millions of fans, Ramy was more than a comedian. He was a cultural anthropologist, a reluctant theologian who had turned the internal, often contradictory, struggles of a millennial Muslim American into a universal art form. His Peabody and Golden Globe-winning show, Ramy, was not a political manifesto but a mirror held up to the complexity, contradiction, and messy beauty of faith and identity in the modern world. It was beloved precisely because it refused to offer easy answers. When the two men shook hands, it wasn't merely a greeting. It was the collision of two worlds, two distinct languages of power. On one side, the world of definitive answers, of partisan battle lines, of focus group-tested messaging. On the other, the world of lingering questions, of moral ambiguity, of uncomfortable, inconvenient truths. Jeffries began with charm, deploying it like a strategic asset. His voice was smooth and laced with what sounded like genuine admiration. He praised Ramy, calling his show sharp, brilliant, and a part of America we rarely get to see. He framed Ramy's success as the embodiment of the American dream, a testament to the nation's promise. It was a masterful display of political affability, a way of anointing the guest with establishment approval, of lulling him into a sense of security before the knife was drawn. Ramy, perhaps sensing the artifice, or perhaps simply being true to his nature, responded with caution. He accepted the compliment but immediately complicated the narrative. "I think the show is also about the complexity of that dream," he said, his voice softer than Jeffries's but no less resonant. "The cost, what gets lost along the way." It was a gentle pushback, a hint that he would not be easily flattened into a convenient political symbol. And that was the opening Jeffries saw. He had offered Ramy a crown, and Ramy had politely pointed out its thorns. Before the audience's warm applause had even faded, Jeffries struck. His question was wrapped in the language of civic concern, but its intent was as cold and sharp as steel. "Do you ever worry?" Jeffries asked, leaning forward slightly and letting the question hang in the air. That perhaps this brand of introspective, ambiguous art is a luxury we can no longer afford. That in a time of such clear and present danger to our democracy, it's a distraction from the real fight? The room went quiet, The temperature dropped. The trap had been set. Jeffries wasn't just asking about a TV show. He was questioning the very relevance and responsibility of art in a time of political crisis. He was framing complexity as a weakness, moral ambiguity as a form of betrayal. He was issuing a challenge. Are you with us, or are you just navel-gazing while the republic burns? Ramy didn't flinch, but a subtle shift occurred. He sat back, his relaxed posture giving way to a more focused stillness. His easygoing calm was replaced by a sharp clarity in his eyes. He was no longer a guest. He was a witness under cross-examination. "Congressman," he replied, his voice slow and deliberate, each word chosen with care. "I think the moment we decide that art should only serve a single, pre-approved political purpose is the moment we start to lose that fight." He was drawing a line in the sand. He was defending the right for complexity, for doubt, for humanity itself to exist. But Jeffries was ready for that. He had anticipated the philosophical defense and came prepared with a brutally pragmatic dismissal. He brushed aside Ramy's point as if it were a quaint, academic notion. He spoke of normalizing apathy, of the world being on fire, while Ramy's character was just trying to figure out his life. It was a devastatingly effective two-pronged attack. It painted Ramy's art as both politically irresponsible and navel-gazingly self-indulgent. It was the establishment's critique of the artist. "Your pain is not useful to us." And then, Jeffries delivered the most ruthless blow, the one designed to sever Ramy from his own perceived base and expose him as a fraud. "Who is your art for?" he asked, his voice now devoid of its earlier warmth. "Does it really mobilize your community? Or does it simply make liberal white audiences feel better about their multicultural bona fides while they sip their Chardonnay?" The accusation hung in the air, venomous and precise, that Ramy was not a cultural revolutionary, but a commodity, a court jester for the very elites he seemed to critique. Jeffries was saying that Ramy's art wasn't a weapon for the marginalized, but merely a decorative ornament in the living room of establishment liberalism. The interview was over. The interrogation had begun. The temperature in the studio had chilled. The initial warmth of the welcome had completely evaporated, leaving behind a tense, brittle silence that crackled with unspoken hostility. The audience, who had come expecting a civilized conversation between two influential figures, now found themselves witnesses to a public dissection. They shifted uncomfortably, their polite applause replaced by nervous murmurs and sharp intakes of breath. Hakeem Jeffries, sensing he had drawn blood and now held the upper hand, continued his assault with the cold precision of a surgeon. He no longer bothered to hide his contempt behind the veneer of polite inquiry. He challenged Ramy openly, his questions now structured as indictments. "You've had a great run," Jeffries said, his tone dripping with a condescension so thick it was almost insulting. "A great run. But isn't it selfish to keep taking roles and attention from the next generation of voices? Don't you think, at this point, you're just in the way?" It was a question designed to humiliate, a political power play disguised as a cultural observation. It implied Ramy was a relic, his hard-won relevance now an obstacle to progress. The attack was meant to age him, to render him obsolete in real time. Ramy, silent for a long beat, let the insult settle before returning fire with a commensurate coldness. "If knowing when to step aside means leaving the stage for mediocrity, for simple sanitized stories that fit a party's agenda," he said, his voice quiet but cutting, "then no, Congressman, I don't think it's time." The crowd cheered, a wave of defiant support for the artist against the politician. But Jeffries was unmoved, waving away their applause as if it were an irrelevant nuisance. He seamlessly shifted his line of attack, moving from Ramy's relevance to the quality of his work. He cited anonymous critics who claimed the show had lost its edge, that Ramy's performances had become formulaic. He was attempting to dismantle the very artistic ground on which Ramy stood, suggesting not only that his art was politically useless, but that it was no longer even good. Then, the attack became more personal and far more venomous. Jeffries dredged up criticisms from within the Muslim community, accusing Ramy of airing our dirty laundry by depicting taboo subjects like premarital sex, substance use, and doubts about faith. This was a cruel tactical move, a classic divide-and-conquer strategy designed to isolate Ramy from the very community he was lauded for representing. Jeffries was attempting to strip him of his authenticity, to paint him as a traitor to his own people. Humanity is not a PR campaign, Ramy shot back, a deep weariness now evident in his voice. He had fought this battle before, in countless interviews and op-eds. Pretending we're perfect is a form of dishonesty that serves no one. But Hakeem Jeffries wasn't interested in humanity. He was interested in victory. He leaned back in his throne-like chair, the practiced smile returning, now tinged with something cruel. "You certainly believe you're special, don't you?" he sneered, framing Ramy's defense of his art as an act of ego. "Maybe the industry has moved on and you're just another actor who doesn't know how to bow out gracefully." Every question was another twist of the knife, designed to bleed Ramy out, to provoke an emotional reaction that Jeffries could then label as instability. And it almost worked. You could see the internal battle playing out on Ramy's face, the tightening of his jaw, the flicker of anger in his eyes, the deep breaths he took to maintain his composure. This wasn't a debate about ideas anymore. It was an assault on his identity, his integrity, and his life's work. "Let me tell you something about bowing out, Congressman," Ramy finally said, his voice low but sharp, each word landing with weight. "You don't get to write my ending." It was a declaration of war. The subtext was gone. The battle was now in the open. Jeffries, perhaps sensing he had pushed Ramy to the brink, decided it was time to go for the kill. He leaned forward, abandoning all pretense of respect. "Oh, please, Ramy. You talk about your career like it's some noble mission. But at the end of the day, it's just movies. It's just comedy. You're just playing pretend. So maybe it's time to stop acting like you're better than everyone else." That was the final insult. A complete, contemptuous dismissal of the value of Ramy's life's work, reducing it to mere child's play. And it was the moment something in Ramy Youssef finally snapped. The carefully maintained wall of calm didn't just crack, it shattered. The artist who had built a career on exploring doubt and vulnerability was about to show what happened when his convictions were pushed to their absolute limit. His calm vanished, replaced by a cold, righteous fire. "You think this is just acting?" he asked, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper that seemed to suck the air out of the room. "You think it's just pretend?" He leaned forward, his energy coiled and potent, no longer the guest but the interrogator. "The difference between you and me, Congressman," he said, his voice beginning to rise with controlled intensity, "is that I know what it means to fight for something real. You sit here behind a desk, lobbing insults crafted by your staffers, and call it debate, but all you've really done is build a career by tearing people down so you can feel taller." The audience exploded. Their support for Ramy was now thunderous, a roar of validation. Hakeem Jeffries' smile finally cracked, replaced by a flicker of genuine panic. He had lost control of the room, of the narrative, of his guest. His prey had refused to die quietly. Instead, it had turned and bitten back, hard. Ramy leaned back, his eyes burning with an intensity that seemed to pierce through the camera lenses. "You want to talk about relevance?" he said, his voice now dripping with a contempt that mirrored what Jeffries had shown him. "When you've spent 50 years building something that will be remembered, something that actually changed the way people see the world, come find me. Until then, don't you dare tell me what my legacy is worth." The crowd rose to its feet, cheering, whistling. Jeffries sat frozen, his face a mask of barely contained fury, his hands gripping his notes so hard the paper crumpled. Everyone in the studio, from the producers in the control room to the viewers at home, knew the storm was here. And the devastation was just beginning. The air in the studio was no longer electric. It was volatile. Every camera, every audience member, every crew member felt it now. Ramy Youssef was no longer playing along. He was no longer a guest defending his work. He had seized control of the proceedings. This was no longer an interview. This was a trial, and Ramy was about to deliver his verdict. After Ramy's last words, "Don't you dare tell me what my legacy is worth," a stunned silence hung in the air, broken only by the faint hum of the studio lights. The standing ovation slowly subsided, but the energy remained, a palpable force in the room. But Hakeem Jeffries, a creature of political combat, stubborn and unwilling to concede defeat on his own turf, sat up straighter. He smoothed his note cards, a gesture meant to signal a return to order, a reassertion of his control. "All right," he began, his voice straining to reclaim its earlier condescension, but now laced with a brittle edge. "If you're finished with your little monologue, maybe we can move on to a real question." Ramy's eyes narrowed, a faint, incredulous smile curling at the corner of his mouth. He simply stared, letting Jeffries's dismissive words hang in the air and rot. The audience groaned, and a few distinct boos cut through the tension. Jeffries pressed on, either oblivious or uncaring, doubling down on his attack. "Because while you're busy patting yourself on the back," he continued, "the reality is your show has become a platform for anti-American sentiment. You portray this country as an Islamophobic, racist place. You focus on its flaws. Do you think there's a point where your critique crosses the line into hatred for the country that gave you everything?" Ramy's fingers tapped a slow, deliberate rhythm against the arm of his chair. His voice, when he finally spoke, was dangerously calm, underlined with a cold, hard layer of steel. "You keep talking about this country like it's an abstract idea, a symbol that needs to be protected from criticism. You think patriotism is silence? You think loyalty is blindness?" His laugh was a short, bitter sound. "My critique doesn't come from a place of hatred, Congressman. It comes from a place of love. A deep, complicated, and demanding love. The kind of love that insists the thing you love be better than it island. That's a concept you might not understand. In your world, love is transactional. It's about applause lines and approval ratings." He paused, letting the indictment land. "You want to know what defines me? Not reviews, not your cheap shots. What defines me is knowing I walked into rooms where they didn't want me, delivered performances they couldn't ignore, and opened doors for people who came after me so they wouldn't have to fight so damn hard." The audience erupted in applause again, louder this time. But Jeffries, unshaken, cut back in, his voice sharp with irritation. "Please spare me the martyr act," he said. "You're not Malcolm X. You're not Edward Said. You're just another overpaid comedian who thinks reciting lines makes him a hero." That one landed like a slap in the face. Ramy's entire demeanor changed. The defensive artist vanished, and in his place was a prosecutor. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his voice dropping low enough that everyone in the studio instinctively leaned in, straining to hear. "You want to compare me to real heroes? Fine. I've stood on picket lines for workers' rights. I've spoken in mosques and community centers where civil rights leaders bled. I've paid bail for protesters you wouldn't even bother to look at. Kids fighting for a future you politicians seem determined to sell off. I've used every ounce of privilege I earned not to hoard it, but to shine a light where people like you, in your insulated world of power, won't even look. So don't you dare reduce me to just an actor." The words echoed like thunder through the studio. But Jeffries wasn't done, his lip curled into a final, desperate smirk. "Sounds like you're confusing activism with self-promotion," he said, his words sharp as glass. "Every time you speak out, it conveniently coincides with a new season or a movie release, doesn't it? Almost like it's all just part of the marketing plan." The audience gasped. Even the producers seemed to exchange uneasy glances now. "I mean, tell me, when was the last time you actually did something for someone without a camera rolling? Or is that not part of your brand?" Ramy froze for half a beat, then chuckled, a low, humorless sound that sent a chill through the room. "You really want to go there?" His eyes locked on Jeffries now, no more soft edges. "You sit here every day pretending to care about justice, about truth, about people, but all you're really doing is turning human pain into political punchlines. You think being on TV gives you the right to dissect other people's lives, to humiliate them for sport, But you wouldn't last 5 minutes walking the path I walked to get here. The path my parents walked. The path millions of people in this country walk every single day. The audience roared in approval, but the studio felt on the brink of something dangerous now. Jeffries rolled his eyes theatrically. Oh, please, Ramy. Don't pretend you're some kind of saint. We all know about the reputation, the ego, the temper, the stories of you berating crew members, alienating directors. You're not the untouchable legend you think you are. Ramy leaned back, laughing softly. But there was no humor in it. It was the laugh of a man who had nothing left to lose. You've got a lot of nerve, he said, his voice rising now. Sitting there behind that desk, hiding behind gossip and hearsay from anonymous sources, trying to diminish what you couldn't even begin to understand. He stood up slowly, deliberately, towering over the panel. His 6-foot frame seemed to fill the entire stage. Now let me explain something to you, Congressman, and everyone else here. I've worked my entire life to build something real, something that matters. And every single thing I've earned the hard way. Nothing was handed to me. Nothing was free. And no, I don't owe you or Congress or anyone else an apology for surviving it. The crowd was on its feet now, clapping, cheering, but he didn't even glance at them. His eyes were locked on Jeffries. You want to talk about ego, about temper? Try walking into a room where no one wants you there, over and over again, and still delivering excellence every single time. Try carrying the weight of representation for entire generations of people, while men like you sit here on your throne and tear you down for ratings. Jeffries opened his mouth, but Ramy didn't give him the chance. You think you know me? You don't know a damn thing. And if you think you can sit there and reduce me to tabloid headlines and political insults, then you're even more clueless than you look. The studio was dead quiet now. Ramy took a step closer to Jeffries, his presence suffocating the space. You've made a career out of humiliating people for political gain, Congressman, but today, you picked the wrong man. For the first time all evening, Hakeem Jeffries looked rattled, his carefully constructed armor of power and control cracking under the weight of Ramy's righteous fury. The crowd was now chanting his name. Ramy, Ramy, Ramy. Ramy straightened his jacket, his jaw tight, his breathing steady. You wanted a show. You got one. But understand this. Every word you said today doesn't define me. It defines you. With that, he stepped back from the panel, his hand hovering over the microphone clipped to his jacket. And everyone in the studio knew the storm wasn't over yet. The final act was about to begin. Some moments on live television become history, not because of what's said, but because of what's finally no longer left unsaid. And Ramy Youssef had nothing left to hold back. This wasn't just an exit. This was a reckoning. The audience was still chanting his name, a rhythmic, pulsing roar of support, when Ramy's fingers unclipped the microphone from his jacket with one sharp, deliberate motion. The soft electronic pop of his mic disconnecting echoed through the hushed studio like a gunshot. For a moment, he just stood there, the cable dangling from his hand, his eyes locked on Hakeem Jeffries, who sat frozen in his chair. A brittle, panicked smile was painted across his face, but his eyes betrayed something else entirely. Fear. You want to know what the difference is between you and me, Congressman? Ramy asked, his voice low but carrying across the room, unamplified, yet somehow louder and more powerful than anything that had come before. I've spent my life building something that matters. You've spent years tearing people down because you thought no one would ever push back. He took a slow step forward, the weight of his presence pressing down on the entire set, causing Jeffries to instinctively lean back. Well, surprise, the audience gasped. Jeffries tried to retort, his voice cracking slightly. Ramy, you're overreacting. We ask tough questions on this show. That's what we do here. But Ramy cut him off, his hand shooting up in a quiet, commanding gesture. Don't. The single, sharp syllable silenced him immediately. Ramy scanned the producers now, the camera operators, all of them avoiding his gaze. Their earlier professional detachment long gone, replaced with a cocktail of regret, shame, and fear of what he might say next. You sit here day after day pretending you're journalists, pretending you care about the issues. But you're not. You're not journalists. You are not critics. You are not even entertainers. You are predators dressed up in stage lighting and makeup, feeding on other people's lives to fill your airtime. A shocked murmur ran through the audience. You think your job is to hold people accountable, but all you're really doing is keeping yourselves relevant by manufacturing outrage. You trade in outrage like it's a currency, and you wonder why the country is broken, why nobody respects you anymore. Jeffries shifted in his seat, his hands clutching his note card so tightly his knuckles went white. You wanted to talk about my moment being over, about my ego, my temper. Fine. You want the truth? He leaned closer to him, his voice dropping into a conspiratorial whisper that the entire room still somehow heard. I don't need this chair. I don't need your cameras, and I sure as hell don't need your approval. You're not capable of giving it because all you know how to do is tear down what you'll never understand. The audience erupted in applause. Not polite, not tentative, but loud and visceral, like the sound of a dam breaking. Jeffries opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. Here's what's going to happen now, Ramy continued, standing to his full height, sliding the microphone onto the elegant table in front of him. The clatter was the only sound in the room. I'm going to walk out of here. You're going to go to commercial, and your producers are going to tell you how to spin this. Ramy storms off. Ramy overreacts. Whatever tidy narrative you need to tell yourselves to sleep tonight. He paused, scanning the entire room, from the back row of the audience to the camera operators, his stare freezing every person in place. But everyone watching, everyone in this room, already knows the truth. And you, he pointed a finger directly at Jeffries, you're going to have to live with the fact that you showed the world exactly who you really are today. Not me. You. Jeffries visibly swallowed, his face flushed, a deep red now, his eyes darting around for someone, anyone, to rescue him. But no one moved. Ramy finally turned toward the main camera, addressing the millions of viewers at home directly. If you take nothing else from what you have seen today, take this. You do not have to sit quietly while people in power try to diminish you. You do not have to accept their disrespect just because it's wrapped in fake smiles and expensive suits and political rhetoric. He straightened his jacket, gave the faintest, sharpest nod, and said more to himself than to anyone else. Not today. And with that, he turned and walked toward the studio doors. The cameras followed every step of his departure. Each stride was deliberate, steady, monumental. When he reached the threshold, he stopped, turned back one final time, and delivered his closing line, a parting shot that would echo for days. Good luck explaining this to your constituents. And then he was gone. The studio was dead quiet. The audience sat in stunned silence, their applause now replaced by a profound collective awe. The host sat motionless in his chair, his eyes downcast, his hands fiddling with notes he'd long since forgotten how to read. For the first time in the history of legislative order, nobody knew what to say next. The director, in a panic, finally yelled, "Cut to commercial!" into the headsets, and the screen went black. But the damage was done. The cameras panned over the empty gray chair where Ramy had been sitting moments earlier, now just a void filled with more presence and power than the powerful man left sitting on the stage could ever muster. Behind the glass of the control room, producers were in a frantic state, some shouting, others just staring at the monitors in disbelief. Ramy's words hung in the air like smoke. Impossible to ignore, impossible to forget. What began as a routine promotional appearance had become something else entirely. A public reckoning, a seismic shift, a live televised warning to everyone in the political establishment who thought they could play games with a man who had spent his entire life fighting to earn everything they took for granted. The host remained frozen, his carefully cultivated persona shattered under the weight of what had just happened. And somewhere backstage, Ramy Youssef adjusted his jacket, ran a hand over his chin, and stepped out into the cool night air, unbroken, unbowed, and more legendary than ever. This isn't a simple debate. It's a choice. And we want to know where you stand. Let us know in the comments. Are you on the side of order or on the side of truth? There are no wrong answers, only your perspective. If this story made you think, if it made you question everything, hit that like button. That's how we know we're asking the right questions. And if you believe these are the conversations we need to be having, right now, more than ever, subscribe and hit the notification bell. We don't just report the news, we dissect the narrative. Thanks for watching.